The bullies never expected this. They picked the wrong quiet kid. Marcus Rivera stood at the entrance of Oakwood High School, adjusting his worn backpack straps as students streamed past him like he was invisible. At 17, he was neither tall nor particularly muscular, with dark hair that seemed determined to fall into his eyes and clothes that hung loose on his lean frame. Most people would describe him as forgettable, exactly what he preferred. 3 weeks into his junior year at this new school, Marcus had perfected the art of blending into the background. His family had moved here from California after his father's job transfer, leaving behind the only life he'd ever known. The transition hadn't been easy, but Marcus had learned long ago that staying quiet and keeping his head down was often the safest approach. What his new classmates didn't know, what nobody at Oakwood High could possibly guess, was that Marcus had spent the last 8 years training in mixed martial arts under his uncle's guidance. His uncle, a former professional fighter, had drilled into him not just the physical techniques, but also the discipline and restraint that came with real power. Fighting isn't about proving you're tough, his uncle always said. It's about protecting what matters when everything else fails. That philosophy had kept Marcus out of trouble at his old school, and he intended to maintain that record here. Unfortunately, some people mistake quiet confidence for weakness. Well, what do we have here? The voice belonged to Jake Morrison, a thick-shouldered senior with bleached tips in his brown hair and a permanent sneer that seemed surgically attached to his face. He stood near the lockers with his constant companion, Derek Santos, a wiry kid with sharp features and eyes that always seemed to be looking for trouble. Marcus had noticed them before. They were the type who ruled their little corner of the school through intimidation, collecting followers and targeting anyone who seemed vulnerable. For the past 2 weeks, they'd been testing him with small provocations. Shoulder checks in the hallway, comments just loud enough for him to hear, the occasional accidental bump that sent his books flying. Still playing the strong, silent type? Jake continued, stepping into Marcus's path as he tried to navigate toward his first period class. That's cute, but it's getting old. Derek flanked him on the other side, completing the trap. Yeah, we're starting to think you don't like us or something. That hurts our feelings. Students flowed around them like water around rocks, most too absorbed in their own concerns to notice or care about another hallway confrontation. A few slowed their pace, sensing potential entertainment, but none showed any inclination to intervene. Marcus met Jake's gaze steadily. "I'm just trying to get to class." "See, that's your problem right there," Jake said, his voice taking on a mock-friendly tone. "You're always in such a hurry. Maybe you need to learn how to relax a little." Without warning, Derek grabbed Marcus's backpack and yanked it off his shoulders. The sudden motion sent Marcus stumbling backward as notebooks and papers scattered across the hallway floor. "Oops," Derek said with exaggerated innocence. "Butterfingers." Marcus looked down at his scattered belongings, then back at the two seniors. Every instinct his uncle had trained into him screamed for action. Specific techniques flashed through his mind, combinations that could end this confrontation in seconds. But he also heard his uncle's voice. "The strongest fighter is the one who never has to prove it." So instead of striking, Marcus knelt and began collecting his papers. "Thanks for the help," he said quietly, his voice devoid of sarcasm or anger. Jake's sneer deepened. "What a little pushover. Come on, Derek. This isn't even fun." They walked away, leaving Marcus to gather his scattered homework, while other students stepped around him like he was part of the furniture. Only one person stopped, a girl named Sarah from his chemistry class, who helped him collect a few loose sheets. "They're jerks," she said quietly, "but they usually get bored if you don't give them a reaction." Marcus nodded his thanks, but privately doubted it would be that simple. In his experience, bullies rarely got bored, they just got more creative. Over the next week, Jake and Derek proved his instincts correct. The harassment escalated systematically, as if they were following some unwritten playbook. It started with verbal taunts during passing periods, graduated to more aggressive physical contact, and eventually evolved into elaborate humiliation scenarios designed to maximize Marcus's embarrassment. The cafeteria incident was particularly memorable. Marcus had been sitting alone at a corner table, methodically working through his lunch while reviewing notes for his afternoon history test. He'd chosen the spot specifically because it was out of the main traffic flow, hoping to avoid unwanted attention. Jake and Derek had other plans. They approached with theatrical stealth, Jake carrying a full cup of chocolate milk. "Hey Marcus," Jake said loudly enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "I heard you were really thirsty." Before Marcus could react, Jake accidentally tripped over his own feet, sending the entire contents of the cup cascading over Marcus's head and down his shirt. The cold liquid soaked through his clothes instantly, dripping onto his homework and creating a sticky brown puddle on the table. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Students pulled out phones to capture the moment, already composing social media posts about the milk shower kid. Marcus sat perfectly still for several seconds, chocolate milk dripping from his hair, feeling dozens of eyes fixed on him with a mixture of amusement and pity. "God, I'm so clumsy," Jake said with mock concern. "Here, let me help you clean up." He grabbed a handful of napkins and began roughly scrubbing at Marcus's head, pressing hard enough to be painful while maintaining the pretense of helpfulness. Derek joined in, their assistants becoming increasingly aggressive until they were essentially smacking Marcus with wet napkins. "There you go, good as new," Jake announced when they finished their performance. "Try to be more careful next time, yeah?" Marcus remained seated as they walked away, high-fiving each other and accepting congratulations from their friends. Slowly, he began gathering his ruined papers, his movements deliberate and controlled, despite the tremor of rage building in his chest. The worst part wasn't the humiliation or even the physical discomfort. It was watching how quickly everyone else returned to their conversations, how easily they dismissed what had just happened. A few students shot him sympathetic glances, but none offered help. The unspoken message was clear. This was his problem to solve. That afternoon, Marcus called his uncle from the privacy of his bedroom. "I think I might need to switch schools," he said without preamble. His uncle's voice came through clearly despite the distance. "What's going on, mijo?" Marcus described the situation, careful to keep his tone neutral and factual. His uncle listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions but never rushing to judgment. "So why haven't you handled it?" his uncle asked when Marcus finished. "Because you taught me better than that. Because fighting doesn't solve anything. Because you're scared." The words hit like a physical blow. "I'm not scared of them," Marcus said quickly. "Not scared of them," his uncle agreed. "Scared of yourself. Scared of what you might do if you let go. I get it, Marcus. But there's a difference between choosing not to fight and being afraid to stand up for yourself." Marcus stared at his reflection in the bedroom window. "So, what am I supposed to do?" "You're supposed to remember why I taught you to fight in the first place. Not to hurt people, but to protect yourself and others when no other option exists. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to show them there are consequences for their actions. But if I fight them, then you fight them. But you do it smart, you do it controlled, and you make sure they understand that you're not someone they want to mess with anymore. Can you do that?" Marcus thought about Jake's mocking laughter, Derek's cruel smile, the sea of indifferent faces in the cafeteria. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think I can." The next morning brought a new level of harassment. Jake and Derek seemed to sense that something was different, that their usual tactics weren't having the desired effect, so they decided to escalate dramatically. It started during first period, when Derek accidentally knocked Marcus's textbook off his desk every few minutes throughout the entire class. The teacher, Mr. Henderson, was either oblivious or choosing to ignore the obvious pattern of disruption. During second period, Jake positioned himself directly behind Marcus and spent the entire 50 minutes flicking paper balls at the back of his head. Each impact was small and technically deniable, but the cumulative effect was maddening. The real show began during lunch. Marcus had barely sat down when Jake and Derek appeared at his table, flanked by three of their usual followers: Brian Kelly, a stocky football player with more muscle than brains; Tyler Webb, a junior who seemed to exist solely to laugh at Jake's jokes; and Alex Rivera, whose shared last name with Marcus had become a source of particular amusement for the group. "Family reunion time," Jake announced, gesturing between Marcus and Alex. "Look, we found your long-lost cousin. Maybe he can teach you how to actually stand up for yourself." "Nah," Derek chimed in. "I don't think it's genetic. Some people are just born to be losers." The surrounding tables began to quiet as students sensed the building tension. Marcus continued eating his sandwich methodically, but his awareness expanded to include every person in his immediate vicinity, every possible avenue of movement, every potential weapon within reach. His uncle's training had taught him to assess threats automatically, and what he saw wasn't encouraging. 5 against 1, with Jake and Derek being the real threats, and the others serving mainly as psychological pressure and potential backup. The cafeteria layout offered limited escape routes, and the growing audience meant any confrontation would be very public. "You know what I think?" Jake continued, his voice getting louder to ensure maximum audience participation. "I think our boy Marcus here is all talk and no action. I think he's been pretending to be tough, but deep down, he's just another scared little kid who runs home to mommy when things get rough." Marcus set down his sandwich and looked up, meeting Jake's eyes directly for the first time. "I think you should find someone else to bother." The words came out calm and steady, but there was something in his tone that made Jake pause for just a fraction of a second. Then the moment passed, and his familiar sneer returned. "Or what? You'll call the principal? File a complaint? Face it, Marcus. You're not going to do anything because you can't do anything. You're weak." Derek leaned in closer. "Prove us wrong. Come on, tough guy. Show everyone what you've got." Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the hyper-awareness that came with genuine threat assessment. His uncle's voice echoed in his memory. "When someone pushes you past the point of reasonable tolerance, when they won't stop no matter how much you try to avoid conflict, that's when you make a choice. You can keep taking it, or you can end it." The decision crystallized in that moment, not revenge, not anger, but simple necessity. "Outside," Marcus said quietly, standing up from the table. "The courtyard. Right now." The cafeteria exploded into excited chatter. Students began abandoning their lunches, following the group toward the doors that led to the central courtyard. Jake's followers wore expressions of anticipatory glee, certain they were about to witness their leader demolish the quiet kid who'd finally been pushed too far. Jake himself looked momentarily surprised by Marcus's directness, but quickly recovered his swagger. "Finally, I was starting to think you were going to disappoint me forever." The courtyard at Oakwood High was a large rectangular space surrounded by classroom windows, with concrete walkways forming a cross pattern through the center and patches of grass filling the corners. During lunch period, it normally hosted scattered groups of students eating outside or catching up on homework. Today, word of the impending confrontation had spread like wildfire, and dozens of teenagers were emerging from the building to form an impromptu arena. Marcus positioned himself in the center of the space, his stance casual but balanced. Years of training had taught him to appear relaxed while maintaining perfect readiness. Feet shoulder-width apart, weight evenly distributed, hands loose at his sides. Jake and Derek approached from opposite directions, clearly intending to flank him. Their followers spread out in a rough semicircle, blocking potential escape routes while ensuring they had clear views of the action. "Last chance to back down," Jake called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Just get on your knees, apologize for wasting our time, and maybe we'll go easy on you." The crowd of onlookers pressed closer, phones already recording. Marcus could see faces in the classroom windows above, teachers and students alike drawn by the commotion. In the distance, he spotted Principal Martinez pushing through the crowd, but she was still too far away to intervene quickly. "Your move," Marcus said simply. Jake exchanged a quick glance with Derek, and they attacked simultaneously. It was exactly what Marcus had expected, a crude pincer movement designed to overwhelm him with numbers rather than skill. Jake came straight forward with a wild haymaker punch, while Derek circled right to attack from the side. Marcus had spent countless hours sparring against multiple opponents under his uncle's watchful eye. He knew that the key to surviving a group attack was mobility, timing, and using the attacker's aggression against them. He stepped forward and slightly left, moving inside Jake's punch while simultaneously grabbing the extended arm. Using Jake's own momentum, Marcus pivoted and threw him directly into Derek's path. The two bullies collided in a tangle of arms and legs, stumbling backward as Marcus flowed smoothly out of range. The crowd erupted in surprised shouts. This wasn't what anyone had expected. Jake recovered first, his face flushed with embarrassment and fury. "Lucky shot," he snarled, charging forward again with Derek close behind. This time, Marcus didn't retreat. As Jake closed the distance, Marcus dropped into a low stance and drove his shoulder into Jake's midsection, lifting him off his feet and slamming him onto the concrete with a tackle that would have made the football team proud. Before Derek could react, Marcus rolled to his feet and caught him with a perfectly timed uppercut that snapped his head back and sent him stumbling. "Stay down," Marcus advised, but Jake was already struggling to his feet, rage overriding common sense. "You little freak," Jake gasped, pulling a metal water bottle from his backpack. "I'm going to crack your skull open." The improvised weapon changed the dynamic completely. Marcus couldn't afford to play defensive anymore. An armed opponent required immediate neutralization. As Jake swung the bottle in a wide arc, Marcus stepped inside the attack and trapped the arm against his body. His left hand shot up in a short, sharp strike to Jake's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs and causing him to double over in agony. The water bottle clattered to the ground as Marcus spun Jake around and applied a sleeper hold, cutting off blood flow to his brain. "Go to sleep," Marcus whispered, maintaining the hold until Jake's struggles ceased and he collapsed unconscious. Derek, seeing his leader defeated, tried to flee, but Marcus caught him with a spinning heel kick to the midsection that folded him in half. A follow-up knee strike to the head put Derek on the ground beside his friend, conscious but completely incapacitated. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 2 minutes. Marcus stood over his defeated opponents, breathing hard, but otherwise unharmed. The courtyard had fallen completely silent, except for Derek's groaning and the distant sound of Principal Martinez shouting for people to clear the way. Jake's followers, Brian, Tyler, and Alex, stood frozen in shock, their expressions cycling through disbelief, fear, and grudging respect. The wider crowd of spectators began to murmur among themselves, sharing instant replays and commentary on what they'd just witnessed. "Anyone else?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. No one moved. Principal Martinez finally reached the center of the commotion, her face grim as she surveyed the scene. "Everyone back to the building! Now!" she shouted, then turned to Marcus. "My office! Immediately!" Marcus nodded, stepping over Jake's still unconscious form. As he walked toward the building, he could hear the crowd's excited chatter resuming behind him. By the end of the day, everyone at Oakwood High would know exactly what had happened in the courtyard. The aftermath unfolded exactly as Marcus had expected. Principal Martinez suspended all 3 boys for fighting, though she reduced Marcus's punishment to 2 days after reviewing security footage that clearly showed Jake and Derek as the aggressors. Jake's water bottle attack, in particular, had been captured from multiple angles, making it impossible to argue that Marcus had used excessive force. When Marcus returned to school the following week, everything had changed. Students who had never acknowledged his existence now nodded respectfully when they passed him in the hallways. Jake and Derek, both sporting visible bruises and thoroughly humbled expressions, gave him a wide berth and seemed to have lost all interest in bothering anyone else. The most satisfying moment came during lunch on his first day back. Marcus was sitting at his usual corner table when Jake approached. Alone this time, his followers having mysteriously found other places to be. "Look," Jake said quietly, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance, "I wanted to apologize. What we did to you wasn't cool, and you had every right to defend yourself. I respect that you didn't try to humiliate us after you won. A lot of guys would have." Marcus studied Jake's face, looking for signs of deception or lingering hostility. What he saw instead was genuine remorse and something that might have been relief. "Just leave people alone from now on," Marcus said finally. "Find something better to do with your time." Jake nodded eagerly. "Yeah, absolutely. We're done with all that stuff. I mean it." As Jake walked away, Marcus reflected on his uncle's words about consequences and choices. The confrontation had been necessary, but more importantly, it had been controlled. He hadn't let anger or revenge guide his actions. He'd simply done what needed to be done to end a bad situation. The transformation in the school's social dynamics was remarkable. Other students who had been targets of Jake and Derek's harassment began walking taller, speaking up more in class, reclaiming spaces they had previously avoided. The unspoken understanding that bullying would be tolerated had been shattered, replaced by a new awareness that actions had consequences. Marcus returned to his preferred state of anonymity, but now it was a choice rather than a necessity. Students respected his desire for privacy while also recognizing that he wasn't someone to be trifled with. Teachers, who had previously overlooked him, began engaging him more actively in class discussions, perhaps sensing the quiet confidence that had replaced his former invisibility. The experience taught him something important about the difference between avoiding conflict and accepting abuse. His uncle had been right. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully was to show them there were consequences for their actions. But it was equally important to know when to stop, when justice had been served without crossing the line into revenge. As he settled into his new equilibrium at Oakwood High, Marcus carried with him the satisfaction of knowing he had stood up for himself without losing who he was. The quiet kid was still quiet, but now everyone understood that his silence was a choice, not a weakness, and sometimes that made all the difference in the world.